Hello, buddy. Welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be going over the patch notes for 8.10. So if you want to find the timestamps, you can look in the description for that, and I'll also have a link to the Google Doc as well. So let's go ahead and get in here. So this is one of the least eventful patches that we've had probably all season. There aren't a lot of major changes that are at least very obvious. There are some changes to the jungle, and we'll talk about that most of the time near the end. But let's go over some of the smaller things that are going through. Now, a lot of the stuff that they were testing on the PBE has been removed and does not show up on this patch. So there's no Azir changes, no Rise changes. Pyke is not on this patch. There's no 80 carry changes. No 80 carry itemization changes. Just most of the cool stuff that they were talking about that I did in my patch 8.10 PBE video last week didn't show up on this patch. And so that's why a lot of times, I wait until the actual patch notes release before I do any sort of video about what's on the actual patch, because sometimes stuff on the PBE doesn't make it into the real patch notes. But I know that people like to think about what's going on the PBE, so that's why I've started doing this daily, or not daily, but bi-weekly series. Whenever there's not a patch on a certain week, I'll do a roundup of the PBE. But those changes will be back probably 8.11. I think Pyke's coming out on 8.11. That's a lot of stuff. 8.11 is going to be insanely large if they moved all of that onto 8.11, because that's going to have Pyke. It's going to have the 80 carry changes. In theory, it could have Azir and Rise reworks with a bunch of other champions that they were also tinkering with on this patch, like Kha'Zix and a bunch of stuff. So 8.11 might be one of the biggest patches of the season so far in terms of just crazy impact on the meta, but we get a fairly tame patch this time, so let's go ahead and see what's going on here. Okay, so they're nerfing Sion. I don't really think it's warranted. Frankly, I don't think he's a great pick right now most of the time. He's okay in some select circumstances, but this is going to make it to where you just really won't want to pick him almost ever. I just did a Sion support video that was sponsored by Christoph, so very special thanks to Christoph. And he did have a place before this patch in a bot lane if you just really needed somebody tanky and you just really wanted to push the lane, but they are crushing his wave clear. So they really don't like champions that have wave clear right now, and I talked about this last patch when they nerfed a lot of the mana stuff, and that was aimed at wave clear, because wave clear stops interactivity. Right, so it stops people in lane from interacting with each other. You just push somebody in a tower, you're not going to fight, you're just farming to push them in, and then they're just going to be under their tower farming. So it just kind of forces farm offs when you have wave clear. So one of the most popular strategies in pro play, and for a lot of people in solo queue, especially like boosters and other types of things, will be to push your lane and roam. So the old push and roam strategy, it's classic of like Talia, Twisted Fate, Galio. There are a ton of champions where this is kind of the thing that they do to impact the game. So they're trying to drop the wave clear a little bit to force people to fight more, and they're trying to favor a more assassin type of meta so that people can take more responsibility for their actions, because it's easier to understand if you just get killed by somebody rather than if you get outplayed by people. In terms of macro, like macro is so difficult for people to grasp and understand, and you can see this evident by just all the complaint threads everywhere where people are like, I went 3-0 in lane and then I lost because my other lanes are stupid and died to the other roaming mid laner. It's like, well, yeah, they out macroed you. But League is facing competition from other casual games, primarily Fortnite, where you don't have to take as much responsibility for what's going on. Now, Fortnite is kind of evolving. We'll see where it goes. They're starting to go towards more of a team-oriented thing, a competitive-oriented thing, and that's going to bring on a lot of the same problems that League has. Or not problems, but just like conundrums that are difficult to solve, which is how do you get a casual audience to take responsibility for their actions in a team-based game? It's very difficult to do that, but what Riot is trying to do to alleviate that is to make people to force more one-on-one fights and to make it more obvious why you're winning or why you're losing based on kills. They want kills to be a much larger part of the equation. This is part of the move towards that. So they've been removing wave clear. They've been removing a lot of mana cost to make a lot of the easier mana to get to make you think more carefully about your spells, so that it's more obvious when you get outplayed in lane. And they're trying to make people assassins be a lot stronger and for games to snowball a lot more and just to end a little bit faster. That's another thing. They don't want games dragging on too long. And they want more action just from a spectator perspective. People would be much more excited probably to see something like a Yasuo being played against another assassin mid lane. You've been seeing a lot of Yasuo in MSI rather than, something like Sion versus a Nivea mid lane, right? Where it's just a farm off the whole time. So viewers want to see it. A lot of players prefer that play style, and that helps people take more agency in what happened during the game. Yeah, they're going to complain if they lose to a champion that's overpowered, but at least they'll be able to pinpoint sort of what happened, right, rather than macro. And so macro is still really important, and a lot of top-level players will still win on macro, but this is just part of a greater trend, this Sion nerf, a greater trend of removing wave clears so that they can make the viewing experience better and compete with games like Fortnite by helping people take agency and responsibility at least a little bit more, just a smidge more than they do right now, so that they aren't as frustrated and they feel like they have more control over solo queue. So that's part of this trend, okay? And it's going to continue. They're going to keep doing that probably for the rest of the season. And ultimately, I think that's good, particularly for more casual gamers and for viewers of esports. I think that's good. Or more casual players. I don't know, even top-level players would probably rather play assassins than just farm offs. Maybe it's not just for casuals, but I think especially in terms of just understanding the game and the game state, that is just easier to grasp. Okay, so they basically Roar the Slayer, that's his E. This is the big one. They reduce the secondary damage from 130% down to 100%. Okay, so basically that's effectively removing 30% of the damage on his wave clear. So that's really bad. Now, they're giving him an AP ratio. Doesn't matter. You're never going to build AP on this champion. And they're reducing the base damage a little bit. But the big thing is it's doing 30% less damage to secondary targets. Now, in exchange, they are... everybody gets shredded by this. And everyone who's hit by the primary target. And it lasts for 4 seconds rather than 2.5. So this will give him a little bit better teamfight presence. Your shred will last longer, but... it's not enough. I mean, you're not picking him. Like, he's okay in team fights, but you're primarily picking him because he's like an immovable object in lane that can just push. So, that's one of his things. And now it has a better interaction with Azir's R. It's not going to matter. So, this is... I really don't think we're going to see Sion in professional play anymore after this, and I think it's unlikely. He already in solo queue has really bad matchups in a lot of games. Top lane with the Conqueror fighters, because they have more time to get more items. And they just outscale him. Okay, so Mundo was... Mundo's weird. Like, when it first came out, I feel like I saw a lot of really bad Dr. Mundos, but now it seems like people are figuring out how to play him a little bit better. And I've seen some really strong Dr. Mundos over the last week or so. Maybe half a week. We've seen quite a few of these. So I think the nerf probably is warranted. They are increasing the cooldown 10 seconds at level 1, or at level 6, rather, at rank 1. Is not that big of a deal. It's okay, but like this right here, this extra 20 seconds at rank 3 is a pretty big deal because you really can't fight without that ult. So you're just going to be sitting around waiting for it. And 25% of current health is not really that big of a deal because it's current health, not max health. If it was max health, that would be a little more interesting. But it's current health. So, if you're at, it's 5% of your current. So if you're at like 20% when you activate this, it'll be like 1% of your max health, right? Because 5% of 20 is 1. So it's going to be 1% more of your max health to activate this. I don't think that's going to be a very big deal. So I still expect him to be pretty powerful in the situations where he's strong, and there's a decent player behind him. So I don't think he's necessarily like the most overpowered thing in the jungle or top lane, but I think he's pretty respectable. He's probably a top 10 in each one of those roles. I think I had him as number 9 in my jungle tier list. But yeah, he's decent. He's playable. Some people are complaining like he's really toxic. Like, you can kite him and deal with him a lot of times unless he's ridiculously overfed and people just aren't respecting him. They're trying to sit there and melee him when he has his E active or something. Like, there's counterplay to him. I don't think he's too oppressive, but he can be really good if he gets ahead. He does snowball pretty hard. Poppy, doesn't matter. She's still out of the meta. She got nerfed pretty hard last patch. I'm not really sure how they thought that those changes were going to be neutral. They were pretty clearly massive nerfs in my mind when I covered that patch, but For pretty much no reason. I like just leave her alone or buff her. I mean, I don't know. She's pretty far out of the meta right now. But they've given her a little bit of move speed back. She's still a very rare pick. She's just not going to matter most of the time. Unless you're a Poppy one trick or something. In that case, good. You get a little buff. Zac, this is what I would call a troll buff. So it's kind of like what they did with Shyvana. They're like, okay, if you want to troll, if you want to try to go like full AP Zac, you can, one-shot Zac where you jump in on people. They're just trying to give everybody an AP option once again because they're trying to compete with Fortnite and they just want there to be a lot more action, a lot more deaths. So if people want to play it that way, if they want to be, excited to go in there and one-shot people, you can do it. I still don't think that's going to be an optimal build path. I don't even know what you would build on him. I mean, what are you going to get? Like a death cap or something on Zac? I mean, I guess... let me see his other ratios. Just doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, he needs to go Cinder Hulk because he scales off of health too, because he gets a certain percentage of his max health back when he recombines, and all of his abilities cost a certain percentage of max health. And that's what he gains back when he absorbs blobs. So I think you still want to buy a bunch of health on him. You wouldn't particularly want something like a Rylai's. I guess you could get like a Leandri's or something on him now. That'd be maybe the most viable because at least that has some health on it. Hey, thanks, Constantine. I appreciate the sub. I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, I guess you could go Leandri's on him. For the most part, I just don't think you're going to see that. You're still going to see the Cinder Hulk, Spirit Visage, Warmogs probably. So, I don't know. I guess if you want to go something like... But Luden's doesn't even make any sense. Like, a lot of the, AP items are going to have mana on it. He doesn't use mana, so... Like, I was going to say, like, Luden's for burst. I guess you could go Runic Echoes, but now that has mana on it, too. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. But whatever. If you want to troll it and go full AP Zac just for funsies, now you can do that a little bit better. Okay, Bard changes. This is actually pretty decent. 90 mana is a lot at level 1, and this is the last thing that you level up usually. So now that it's only 70 mana, you can actually use it a lot more in lane without going out of mana. Like, yeah, your chimes give you more mana if you go pick them up, but sometimes you just can't do that in certain lanes as much as you would like. So I really like lowering the cost on this. Now you're at least paying, 70 mana for a 70 heal, which is still, like, really sketchy, but at least it's something in lane. So is this enough to fully bring Bard back, or to, like, bring him, like, all the way into the meta? I don't think so. He still needs, he's very close. He's very close. He just needs a little bit of help. Like, they just need an extra buff on Magical Journey. I think that's the coolest thing. I mean, that would be the creative option, would be just, if people go through this, they get some kind of buff. Like, they get extra AP, or they get extra, even just something as simple as extra movement speed, right? So if you go through Magical Journey, just instead of only getting this movement speed while they're going through the journey, just give them something like this once they leave. Once they leave the Magical Journey, then they just tone down this movement speed a little bit. Just make it like 50% is a lot of movement speed. But then you could actually use this as an engage or a disengage, right? If it had a move speed on it. So, like, for 3 seconds, once you complete Magical Journey, everybody gets a 20% move speed or something. Great. Then you could actually start fights by everyone rolling through the Magical Journey. Or you could give them other buffs. You could give them, if you wanted to, you could give them like AD, AP, extra armor, magic resist, or something like that. But I think that movement speed kind of does make the most sense because that would reinforce using this creatively as an engage option. Even if, like, for balance purposes, you had to say that Bard himself doesn't get this, but everyone else does. I don't know. But something. This needs to do something, or have some kind of ratio on it. Just something. Some kind of scaling on this ability would be nice. The ult's fine. It doesn't have scaling either, but that's fine. But this needs some kind of scaling. Other option, the more simple, just if they don't want to get creative and add in extra stuff on Magical Journey, I think this is the best place to add in some fun creative things. They could also get healed or get a shield or something if they go through it. Would be just to give him some more attack range. So at least give him 525 attack range. Maybe, 550 would be awesome because he has an attack-based champion, but that might be a little too strong with his memes. But I think giving him at least 525 would help out a lot, because it's just so hard to land those attacks in certain lanes with only 500 range. That makes it really tough. So I think giving him 500, at least 525 movement range, and or having Magical Journey gives some kind of buff to people who go through it. Or debuff to enemies. Maybe it slows them down as they go through it. Something like that. I think would be pretty cool. And that would reinforce that it's magical. It gives you stuff, you know, when you go through it. So I think that would be neat. But as it stands, it's not quite enough for poor Bard here. All right. Kindred, this is interesting. So it's going to be really hard to just walk up and steal Kindred's buff. So if you're fighting over Scuttle or something like that early on, and you come up and smite it away from her, she's still going to get the stack. So that's pretty nice. Oh, never mind. It's just allies. Oh, I thought it was if anybody, even the enemy takes it. Okay, my bad. When I read this. So let's go ahead and just, yeah, let's get rid of that. So that's just like for dumb teammates that take your mark, that like last hit the Scuttle or something. Okay, yeah, so that's not going to matter that much. Very small quality of life. And they said small. I was reading it as anytime. I was like, wow, it's going to make it really hard to counter her marks. But yeah, it's just for allies. Okay, so enemies can still steal it from you. Now, this is a weird change. In the context of another change we'll talk about here in just a second. But they're giving it flat mana instead of 7% move speed. Now they are giving it 10% CDR, which is nice, but I feel like you don't need the flat mana because you're going to have such insane mana regen off of the way that they're changing the Hunter's Talisman. I don't know. It's okay. It's alright. I don't think it's that big of a buff. I mean, the 10% CDR is pretty nice. So, it's a nice buff. This is interesting. So now the cooldown is huge. It's 180 seconds. It goes from 180 to 240. So that's from 3 minutes to 4 minutes until you get your secondary ward item. So yeah, you are getting, 30 seconds more potentially on one of your early wards, but this really, really disincentivizes you to ward early for invades. Because now, if you ward early for that invade, you're not going to have a ward for the gank. Because it's going to be 4 minutes before you get your ward back. So it's going to be really hard to ward for invades. So yeah, they're trying to lower the vision a little bit to force more action early game, but their jungle changes are forcing, disincentivizing people from early action. So, I don't know. We'll see. Support. So now you can't get a support item and a jungle item. Very few champions were doing this. I think maybe Eve was getting, or back in the day, she used to get Frostfang or whatever to get the extra movement speed, but then they took that off. I don't know. It was very edge cases where people would get both a jungle and a support item. It was really rare. But at least they're, thinking about item exclusivity and making the jungle economy different from the support economy. So, I like that. Now, if they'll just make the support items exclusive so other people can't poach them, that would be lovely. But we'll see if that actually happens. Okay. Rune changes. So cheap shot I don't think is going to matter. 60 true damage is quite a bit later on in the game. It's possible on someone who could trigger this a lot in a fight. Maybe you would get it. It does have a 4-second internal cooldown. Maybe someone asked me about Ashe getting this later on. I don't know. I'm skeptical. This is it's supposed to be designed for lane trading where you hit them with some kind of slow or something and then you auto attack them. So in some instances, this can be pretty good, but the number's still a little too low. I think, yeah, it is true damage, but true damage doesn't matter as much early in the game before people have a lot of armor anyway. So it's the true damage is intended primarily to counter tanks who have a lot of resistances later, but it's okay. It's not going to matter. It's still going to be a pretty niche rune. I think they should just change it to something else, honestly. It's so similar to Scorch, and Scorch is just better most of the time. I don't know. It just seems like there could be better options. Okay, Ingenious Hunter. So the end product is exactly the same. You get, I think it's 6 stacks? 5 stacks. Yeah, 5 stacks at 5 each. It's 25% plus 15. Still gives you a total of 40%. But now they're giving you a free 5% up front. So it's better early in the game when you don't need to scale. This makes Ingenious Hunter definitely more appealing early game, especially with the nerf to warding totem. Because remember, that 15% that you get early game applies to warding totems. So you're going to get this totem up more often before you complete your warding item. So, you might get an extra ward or 2 down off of that. So there's a lot of really powerful actives too. You've got, Mikhail's, Redemption, Shirelia's is very popular. So I really, really like the Ingenious Hunter rune. There's a chance we might see a return to more of this rune if the Resolve nerf seems strong enough. And we'll have to do some testing and see if that's the case. But I think that's definitely a possibility where you might see people go for a more like Taste of Blood plus Ingenious Hunter as your secondary instead of Resolve on some enchanters in some situations, right? If they have a pretty easy lane, if it's not an all-in lane, you may not have to go Resolve every single time. So this definitely helps. So we'll see, maybe. Especially for people that are going to have a lot of actives, a lot of enchanters. Phase Rush, this is a pretty big buff. Hey, thanks, Leo. I appreciate the sub. This is a pretty big buff. Going from 15% to 25 early. And this will probably make Aurelion Sol. I'm pretty sure he gets it. I'm not sure who else would want Phase Rush. I think I've seen Darius get this occasionally, but I feel like Conqueror is better. So I'm not really sure who gets this rune most of the time, other than Aurelion Sol. Maybe... Does Swain get it? Sometimes. So he goes Phase Rush. Sometimes he gets Airy. So I think it could be pretty good on Swain. Aurelion Sol almost definitely gets it, right? Yeah, Aurelion Sol always gets it. So it's a buff to Sol, and Sol's already really good for people that are good on him. This champion's... He's pretty nice because he has really good wave clear, really good roam, so he kind of breaks those rules that they're trying to enforce on everybody. He still has the push and roam. And he scales pretty well later into the game. He's just a really strong control mage. I'm pretty sure Darius almost always goes Conqueror now. Yeah, he used to go Phase Rush occasionally, but then Conqueror came around. That's pretty much what he always runs. So I don't know. It'll be okay for a couple of champions. I don't think it's going to shift the meta too much. It does make Swain and Aurelion Sol better, and they're already really strong. So they will inch up a little bit in the standings, but I don't expect any kind of massive shifts, like weird things we haven't seen before. But it's always possible. Okay, so they're increasing Demolish a little bit, trying to make that more appealing so that it competes with Bone Plating. I don't think that's going to happen. I still think everyone's going to take Bone Plating. They should probably just put Chrysalis and Bone Plating in the same tree. That would be like the ultimate nerf. The Chrysalis nerf, 10 HP doesn't sound like a lot, but, that's a decent chunk. That's 1/6, right, of the HP that you start with. So that's like, what, 17%? 17% nerf on the health. Bone Plating, if you think of it percentage-wise, that's a 25% nerf on the damage reduction, so... That's pretty big. So the question is, and don't forget that they did nerf your starting health off of this by quite a bit. So you used to start off with like 60 health. You used to start back in the day with 135. Then they dropped it down to 60, and then they dropped it eventually down to like 20 or something, and then it scales up over time. So there's a possibility that maybe people who, went for Chrysalis Bone Plating all the time would go for something like... they might go for Inspiration and then go for the classic Boots Cosmic Insight, or they could go for the Taste of Blood Ingenious Hunter that I mentioned before. So both of those could be some decent options. But yeah, this is good. This need to be nerfed. If every single support is taking this secondary, and so many solo laners, like almost every top laner is taking this as a secondary, most mid laners are taking this, like it's too strong. It's crushing diversity. The thing is, tanks would probably take most of these, but it's really the squishies that take it, because it doesn't matter how much armor and magic resist you have, it blocks the same amount, so it's disproportionately really strong on squishy champions. So that's good. And that's forcing, once again, that's like encouraging people not to interact as much, because the bone plating is going to just reduce a lot of the trading. Okay, in perfect timing, they are reducing the cooldown on this to 8 minutes from 10 minutes, which I really hate that rune. I hope people don't take this as much, but this is obviously going to be a good thing for people that want to get, want to eventually get Azanias. So, you know, you might see Vlad potentially take something like this. That would be a little weird, but I think he goes... I mean, I like the Predator build on him. I think the Predator, and then he probably goes Resolve secondary. Yeah, most people are going Predator. Oh, no, he goes Sorcery. Yeah, for what? Celerity. Because Celerity is just so good with Shirelias. And Gathering Storm. Okay. Yeah, it's hard to give that up, so maybe he won't go for the stopwatch. A lot of times he doesn't even go for Zonias until later in the build anyways. He was really far ahead if he got a death cap this early. But yeah, usually it's like Protobelt, Shirelias. Yeah, or Shirelias, Protobelt, and then you start getting big stuff. Yeah, so I don't know if that's going to bring people back to the Inspiration train, but maybe. It makes it a little more appealing. So I hate that item. That item's so troll, but it's interesting. The Hextech Flash Traps and add a combat lockout. Now, I'm not sure how much this is going to affect most people. Like, Alistar is someone who likes this. So maybe Alistar could pop out of combat. I'm not sure how long it takes to drop the combat debuff, but you'd only have to wait 2 seconds. So I don't think in most situations it's going to matter, but maybe a little bit. Okay, so the big thing going on this patch, and we might actually be able to get done in 30 minutes. It'll be a miracle if we can do it. But the big thing going on this patch that will be kind of meta shifting, and this one is a bit more difficult for me to predict because I don't play jungle a lot, and I'm not sure of the exact math behind certain camps and exactly how much experience you need to hit certain thresholds, and how that combines with the power spikes of different, you know, champions that are in the jungle. So, you know, the jungle is kind of like its own little world, but based on what I can see here, I do have some ideas. I do have some predictions, but, you know, if there's a jungle specialist out there that covers this, they'll probably know the math a little bit better than I do. So basically what it is they are taking away some of these undercover, like, first clear debuffs. So, like, for the Krugs, they used to grant 25% reduced experience on the Krugs and the birds, the chickens, and the Gromp used to give reduced experience as well on the first clear. Then apparently if you were a higher level than the monster, so if you got ahead, then it was reduced experience. So they're getting rid of a lot of that goofy stuff. And the large Krugs, first clear experience reduction has been lowered. So the big thing is they really want you to do Krugs. They want to incentivize it, which is good because a lot of people skip Krugs. It's kind of a tough camp to clear. It takes a really long time. And there's just not enough payoff for doing them. So they just sit there and, like, nobody takes them a lot of times. You know, most people will go blue, wolves, red, gank. That's, like, what 90% of junglers will do a lot of the time. So they're trying to switch that up a little bit to add a little bit more diversity, to make the Krugs a bit more valuable early on, to maybe make the Gromp a little bit more valuable relative to other buffs. So that's one goal, is they want the Krugs to be meaningful. So the Krugs actually got a boost overall, I think, a little bit. But in general, they're lowering the experience of all of the camps early on. And then they eventually power up to, at level 7, they have the same experience. But they want you to choose now. Do you want to spend more time power leveling, or do you want to spend more time ganking and risk being underleveled? So it's a lot more risky to gank. Because before, if you just did that clear, you know, blue wolves, red, gank, whatever, didn't work out, okay, fine, just go back into the jungle. You'd clear it so fast anyways, it doesn't matter. Now, I'm almost positive it's going to take a 4th camp to reach level 3. So I think, I'm not 100%, but I think you're going to have to go something like blue, wolves, red, and then, or like maybe blue, gromp, wolves, red, just something. You're going to have to get a 4th camp in there, I believe, to get to level 3. So, because they've nerfed the experience a lot, so it went from 180 to 115. That's about a third less experience. 1/3 would be 60. Red Brambleback is about a third less. Now, the Krugs aren't as much. That's only 20% less instead of like 33% less. And then the medium Krug is actually the same. And it actually goes up over time to give you a little bit more experience. Then the small Krug is the same and goes up over time. So the Krugs, by and large, actually got a buff. If you do the Krugs, you're going to get a lot more experience off of that. The Wolves are down about a third. Right, so from 100 to 65. Small Wolves are down pretty close to a third, a little bit more, 15 out of 40. The Bird is only down a little bit. But these are down like 50% almost. It goes from 35 to 19. So these are down 50%. And the Gromp is down about a third. Right? So 115 out of 200. I don't know the exact. So 60 would be 30%. So it'd be to 140. So it's a little bit less or a little bit more than a third reduction. So you notice why it's in multiples of 3? Because they don't want you to be able to get 3 camps and reach level 3 like you can do right now. That's why. And so it's very calculated to like try to get you to complete that 4th camp before you get level 3 and you gank. That's going to give the laners time to get to level 3 before they gank you as well. So that's a very deliberate design to add more diversity to the jungle and to add more diversity in decisions, right? So now the people that benefit the most from this are champions that have really good power farming and really crappy ganks early on. So something like Master Yi is going to like this. Someone like Udyr is probably going to like this. Shyvana. Ivern's going to like this a lot because, it's going to allow him, people aren't going to be invading him as fast anymore. Right? So he's going to be able to set down more of his little friends of the forest, especially with the mana buff, which we'll talk about here in a second. Someone like Eve is probably going to like this. People that just don't really have very potent ganks until level 6 are really going to like this. So the power farmers to level 6, it's going to help out. And it's going to hurt champions who rely pretty heavily on or who don't clear very well and rely very heavily on their ganks. So like Kha'Zix, probably hurt him a little bit, I think. I don't know. Kha'Zix's clear is okay, I suppose. But like Lee Sin will definitely be hurt by this. Shaco will be hurt by this because both of them just want to, get to level 3 and go gank immediately and make an impact. So this is going to throw off their timings a little bit, slow them down, especially champions that don't scale particularly well later into the game. Nidalee be hurt by this. And this is, by contrast, this is going to give the laners a little bit more time to be aggressive. So very aggressive laners are going to benefit from this. So people like Soraka, who are very susceptible to ganks, but who can usually push and create a lot of pressure, or Caitlyn, or Zyra, Nami. A lot of these heavy, like, early game domination champions are going to love this stuff because Darius top lane. They're going to love this stuff because then the jungler's not going to come up there and interfere in their lane as much. And so the lane dominant champions are going to get a little bit more time to really drive their advantage home in the early game. So I don't know what the exact timing will be, but usually people can get up to top lane and gank by like 250 to 3 minutes. This might change it to like 320 to 330, something like that. It depends on the champs, but it's definitely going to slow down the early game. And I like this as someone who, is a laner. I don't like the jungler coming in and completely dominating and throwing the lane, Like, yeah, I can play around it but early in the game, you just can't get enough wards for the jungler a lot of times, and they've made that by design. They've dropped the vision a lot, and they are reducing the vision even more to make those ganks a little bit more impactful when they come through, but it's just like, if the jungler just sits on you, because right now, because there are so many times bot lane where the jungler will just sit on our lane, right? They'll just sit there, like 3 ganks in a row, and I just feel like I can't do a lot, right? And the payoff is not enough. When my jungler's up there just counter jungling their Krugs or something, it's like, who cares? Like, the amount of experience that their jungler is denying us, and they're just sitting there letting that Twitch farm up in our lane, and I can't do anything aggressive to stop it because the jungler's just sitting there. It's really frustrating when our jungler is just counter jungling stuff, and it doesn't matter because, you know, it just doesn't. This will matter more. So now, if they want to camp my lane like that, then they're going to pay the price. They're going to fall behind in levels, and then our jungler eventually will be able to overcome them, hopefully, at some point. But right now, in bot lane, and this doesn't fully fix the issue, but it just feels like whoever sits on bot lane, you just win. And I say this all the time on stream. If you're a jungler, and especially if the mid lane comes down with that, and you just 4-man dive bottom, you just win the game, basically, like 90% of the time. You just have a mid laner who pushes harder, you push, you have a jungler who can gank early, and you just go down there and 4-man dive bottom, and that's it. Because you're going to get 2 kills out of it almost every time. You get the tower, you get the dragon, and then you just snowball your advantage. And if that happens to you, there's very little you can do about that. If your jungler doesn't come down to help that, or your mid laner picks somebody who can't wave clear, like the best you can do is just back up off the tower if you have enough wards to spot it in time. Just back up off the tower and just give them a free tower and first tower and dragon, and that's about all you can do. So they're trying to combat this a little bit by slowing down the jungle, slowing down the wave clear mid lane, so that there's a much higher opportunity cost for doing something like that. Because I don't mind that strategy, that's fine, but I feel like if we survive it, right, like if we don't get killed, and especially if we can somehow hold the tower and not get killed, there should be some kind of reward for that. So our jungler that's just like AFK farming should be getting a major advantage as long as we're not losing to those ganks. Or that mid laner who's just like pushing into their tower instead of roaming down bottom should be getting a major advantage if it's fail. So I just think that the fail roams need to have a higher opportunity cost, and that's what they're doing with this. So I think that's good game design, right? Because right now it's basically free if you just camp and sit in places. It just doesn't matter as much. And, you know, there are multiple ways they could do this. Right now they're choosing to slow down the early game jungle, but they could make the jungle camps count for more. They could slow their respawn timers. Or maybe, I guess you would want to increase their respawn timers so that you have to go farm them more often. They've done all of these things in the past. They've tried to get the jungle right over time, but it's just really, really hard to balance. Yeah, I like it. I think it's good. So, yeah, you know, junglers who play early aggression jungles, they like to snowball hard, like those Lee Sin players, Shaco players, things like that. They're not going to like this, but I think that people who like to play stuff like, you know, Evelyn or Master Yi or these other kind of, you know, farm it up type of junglers early on are going to enjoy this. And laners who like not getting constantly ganked are going to like this as well, so I think that's nice. I like to play lane dominant enchanters a lot of times, so that I like that personally, but or Zyra as well. Okay, Rift Scuttle. So now Rift gives a lot of experience. You get 115 experience off of this instead of just 10, so that's a pretty big deal. So if you get this Scuttle, you'd still need a 4th camp, I believe, so you can't do something like blue scuttle red, like a weird path like that. You still would have to have that 4th camp, but this would give you a little bit more of an advantage, and you get a bit more gold. Early on it's the same, but later you get to 140. The experience is nice, but it has 50% more health. It's going to take forever to kill. It spawns faster. I mean, they're trying to hype it up like, this is really important. People are going to be fighting for Rift buff. This is going to be a team objective. Really? It's going to be a team objective for 100 more experience and like a marginal amount more gold when it's going to take a long time to kill? I mean, I don't know. I don't think this is hype enough. It does respawn faster. I don't know. Maybe I'm underestimating this. Like, I think it should just give a buff. I think Dota 2 has like wards or something that I don't remember what they are. Things that show up in the river that give you buffs. I think it should just be like a 3rd buff on the map. Maybe it just gives you more movement speed or something, like for roaming. I think Dota 2 may do that exact same thing. I don't remember. There was something like that in Storm of the Imperial Sanctum, this MOBA for StarCraft 2 that I used to play really far back in the day, like 7 years ago, that did that, where you would get like a speed buff for a little bit. So I think if you kill Scuttle, you should get some kind of like movement speed buff, like 10% movement speed for, 2 minutes or something like that. I think that would be really nice. And now that would incentivize people to go get that buff. So that's what I would like to see. If they're going to just make it on one Scuttle anyways, and they really want to make it a thing that people fight over, like another objective on the map, then that's what I would do. I would say it gives whoever kills it 10% movement speed, and then still gives the vision or whatever. Like, the vision is nice, but I think that, or if they increase the vision more, so it's like this huge radius that like showed you like the whole river or something like that when you got it, that would be pretty sweet too. But like they need to just make it more meaningful. This is not enough. Like, I mean, it's okay, sure. Like 100 experience is definitely something, but you're gonna have to go really far out of your way to get this a lot of the time. So I don't know. I would like to see a movement speed buff or greater vision of the river, but we'll see. Now, it does show up more often. It's every 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes, so that's interesting. Certain champions like Kindred might like this if the Scuttle gets the mark a lot. I don't know. Now, here's one of the really big changes that I think is interesting. So they're basically giving Hunter's Talisman 40 mana per 5 seconds based on missing mana while in the jungle instead of 150%. If you have, like, an enchanter or even, like, a not enchanter, like someone who has, like, 8 base mana per 5 or 10 base mana per 5, let's say, 150% would give you 25 mana per 5. But this is giving you 40 mana per 5. Now, it's only when you're really low. And that's in the jungle and the river right now. So that's the river too. So that's a lot of the map. So when you're in the jungle or a river, you get up to 40 mana per 5. So this is going to very, very heavily help champions that have mana problems early, where that's their main way that they don't clear. So that's the main thing that gates them. So I thought of like Amumu, Fiddlesticks, Eve, Gragas, Ivern, Maokai, Sejuani. Those are my initial thoughts. So we'll see. I mean, and this can apply because everyone's going to get this whenever they get skirmishers and all of that. When they get skirmishers, stalkers, like, everyone's going to get this. So it's not just the AP people. So some of the other people get it too. But the people that are really held back by their mana costs, that are like perhaps pretty powerful, but they just run out of mana so much, this could help them out quite a bit. And now this was 225% once you complete it though. I'm not sure. So if you have 10 base, 225% would be like 32. So it's not that much of a difference once you complete the Saber, I don't think. Maybe a little bit. Especially for people who don't care that much about attack speed. You don't get the 15% bonus attack speed for a while. But yeah, early on, I think that's going to help. I know definitely for Ivern, I haven't played a ton of these other junglers, but for Ivern, for sure, that's a major thing that holds you back, is you just run out of mana early on, especially if you steal their camp. Like, if you're topside, even if you have blue buff, sometimes you run out of mana early a lot of times. You run out of mana before you run out of health a lot of times, so I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting. So I think that people that Kindle damage is 60 over 5 seconds in 30. So I don't know what the Kindle means on this. But yeah, it's basically doubling the damage. So yeah, this should help out AP champions a little bit. Will it bring them all back? Will we see all AP champions? I don't necessarily think so, but it will certainly help, especially these champs that want to farm to 6. Once again, like your Fiddle, your Eve, your Amumu, Gragas. Now, Gragas has some okay early ganks, but maybe Maokai. Maokai has decent ganks. Sejuani. Like, all these champions will like to get this. Now, they did change Runic Echoes, too. I don't know if I mentioned that up here. I think I did mention it. I just don't think this is going to matter. Like, you get 300 mana, which is okay. 10% CDR. It's alright. I just don't think a lot of champions are going to get that still. Like, maybe some, but okay. So, yeah, mana-hungry junglers get a buff. Krugs are way more important. You're probably going to see less ganks early, and it's a buff for lane-dominant champs like Caitlyn, Darius, Draven, Soraka, Zyra. Okay. And I think that's pretty much it for this patch. So now, whoever gets the shutdown gold is going to get it for themselves. So once again, they're wanting you to feel like you're empowered. If you're doing a good job, you have a better control over the game. Just to fight Fortnite-itis, as I say before, just to feel like the game is not as team-reliant, even though it's a team game, so that you can solo carry, if you're doing really well, if you're shutting down these difficult people, then you get the bonuses now. So this is going to snowball a lot more gold onto one person instead of everybody else. So now this only works if you're behind. So handing off the kills to the right people is more important here, but I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. I mean, if your assassin gets a shutdown on their assassin, then that's really good. So this will slingshot gold back potentially, but it could just as easily go to somebody who's, it could go to your Soraka support, could get the shutdown on accident, and now it doesn't get split amongst the rest of your team. So I don't know. We'll see how this goes. I don't think this is going to be a huge deal. I think the bounty is actually a little bit less. So there's no bounty on 1 or 2 kills. On 3 kills, it's 200 gold to the killer instead of 300 gold for the team. So this is actually less gold for a shutdown overall. Quite a bit less gold. It's like 1/3 less. Here it's 100 less. It's 250 to the killer rather than 350 for the team. That one's 150 less, 450 down to 300. And the dying resets the bounty to 0. Yeah, so this is basically lowering the total gold that you get for shutdown. So it's going to let people snowball harder because the enemy team's not going to have as much of a chance to get back in there when your, 5-0 Yasuo decides to try to 1v5 and suicides. It's not going to throw as hard as it used to. Anyways, yeah, that's going to be it. So, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on the meta. The biggest thing is the junglers are going to chill a little bit more, and so that's going to help out lane-dominant champions. So that's going to hurt champions that don't have a great laning phase. The insane, 40 per mana early on is going to be pretty big for certain champions that just want to farm. So I think Eve is the biggest one because Eve is actually pretty viable right now. She's quite strong. I had her in my top 10. So this Eve will be the biggest immediate beneficiary of this. I still think Fiddle might have some problems, but you might see Fiddle a little bit more. You might see some tanks have a bit of an easier time. Sejuani does cost a lot of mana, her ability, so this will help out Sej a little bit. You might see some Maokai. He's pretty far out of the meta, though. Amumu's still not going to be that great. Maybe Nunu. This doesn't fix Nunu's problems, though, so I think the real winner there is going to be Eve, but you might see some other champs get some buffs. Nice quality of life for Bard. Nerfs to these guys. So I think that the biggest winner here are going to be Soraka, maybe Fiddlesticks, and Eve. It's going to slow down the jungle. It's going to let Eve and Fiddle farm to 6. They're going to benefit from those mana buffs. And then Soraka, people are not going to be able to camp her as early, and there might be less divers. We'll see. The jungler is not going to be as far ahead in terms of experience as they used to be. So it's going to be a lot harder for those junglers to dive and get on top of you and kill you as easily as Soraka. So that's really nice. It's going to slow down your Shakos, your Kha'Zixes, and stuff like that from getting on you and killing you before you have a chance to get more defensive items. Biggest losers are going to be Sion and Mundo for obvious reasons. They got direct nerfs. But then also some of these early game junglers like maybe Kha'Zix who want to get ahead, or as I said, Shaco, Lee Sin, things like that aren't going to like it as much. So we'll see. Overall, I don't expect massive shifts in the meta. That'll probably come on next patch, but there could be a couple of moves here and there based on how this jungler stuff ends up panning out. But that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Wow, look at that. Kept it under 50 minutes. I think that's pretty strong. So, yeah, I'll see you next time. Have a good day.